There are some countries that continuously tend to impress me. Iceland is definitely one of those. When financial and bank crises strike, they bounce back. When nature is harsh, rough, and tough, they just adapt and go on. And when they see that there is a gender pay gap to be fixed, they just do it. My name is Even Bolstad. I'm Managing Director of Norwegian HR Association, HR Norge, and President of the EAPM, European Association for People Management. EAPM is an umbrella association that brings together HR associations, and by that, HR professionals, HR departments, and companies all over Europe. We form a community of practice and act as a knowledge hub, not only to the benefit of professionals and companies, but also the society we are all part of and so dependent on. Working life is important to all of us, whatever role we have. Through the EAPM, we have a tool and a platform for sharing practices, showing the way, and supporting us all with insights, network, and inspiration. Focus is on people, organization, and working life issues. How to create value for companies, individuals, and society. For more info, please visit eapm.org. And today is the 8th of March, the International Women's Day. Congratulations to you all. The International Women's Day and gender issues, that's important to you, the female part of the population. But importance goes even wider and further than that. It's in the core, it's about values. It's about what kind of society and companies we want to build and be part of, women and men together. I cannot think about any better way of celebrating this day than making a visit to Iceland, #1 on gender equality, according to World Economic Forum. We have reserved some time at the end for questions and answers. And for that, I would like you to use the Q&A button on your screen. And by that, I give the word to Astis Simonardottir, President of our Icelandic Member Association, Manatur. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ásdís Simonardóttir, and I'm the President of Mannauður, the Icelandic HR Association. Well, our association has grown rapidly in recent years, going from 40 HR managers in 2011 to 470 HR professionals today. Our goal is to be progressive and future-focused in our promotion of HR and the people profession. We support our members in their strategic and operational work, providing a space for networking, encouragement, and knowledge sharing. We shape the discussion and drive real change in the world of business by hosting events, our annual congress, for example, as well as collecting data and engaging with the media, labor market, and policymakers in Iceland. We are honored and extremely excited to collaborate with EAPM on this event today. Just do it. Yeah, just do it. What a cocky statement. Is it really that simple to take a leading position in the fight against gender inequality? Well, yes and no. Of course, the reality is a bit more nuanced. But one thing is certain today on International Women's Day. From challenge comes change. So let's all choose to challenge. It hasn't been a smooth ride. In 1961, when the first act on equal wages for women and men was passed in Iceland, it was believed that gender pay gap would disappear within a few years. And now, 60 years later, the gender pay gap is still in existence. So waiting has not worked, education has not worked, and Awareness campaigns, they've not worked. So what could be done? Well, Iceland turned to the tools of the bureaucrats. The technical and, to many people, mind-numbingly boring world of international ISO standards. In 2018, Iceland introduced the first policy in the world that requires companies and institutions with more than 25 employees to prove that they pay men and women equally for a job of equal value. The policy is implemented through the Equal Pay Standard, a radical new tool in the fight against gender inequality. The Equal Pay Standard has stimulated discussions both within companies and society as a whole about how jobs are valued, based on what criteria and whether these criteria are still relevant in the current society and labour market. This doesn't happen overnight, and we are not here yet. The Equal Pay Standard is not a magical tool that fixes it all. But it's no secret that there is still a huge gap between typically male and typically female sectors. But I strongly believe that gender equality is not a women's issue. Men are not just part of the gender equality conversation, they are and must be a part of the solution. So it is with great joy that I share this event today with two men. Þorsteinn Víglundsson, former Minister of Social Affairs and Equality, under whose leadership the Bill of Law was passed in 2017, and Víðir Ragnarsson, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Reykjavik Energy. So I look forward to engaging with you all in the Q&A session afterwards. See you.
Hello, my name is Þorsteinn Víglundsson. I'm the former Minister for Social Affairs and Gender Equality in Iceland. And back in 2017, we passed a new legislation in Iceland making equal pay certification mandatory for all companies with employees for 25 people or 25 employees or more. Now, in my presentation here in the next 15 minutes, I would like to go through just briefly how does this new legislation work and why was it so necessary to make it mandatory for all companies. But I would like to start by telling you a little bit about Iceland and our track record in gender equality. For 11 years running, Iceland now has been number one in the World Economic Forum Gender Equality Index. And this is no coincidence. We can see that all of the Nordics have fared very nicely on the index, and we have learned a great deal from our neighbors in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark and Finland. Iceland has been quite ambitious when it comes to its track record here, and we of course intend to maintain our leadership in the area. And the new legislation back in 2017 was one of the steps we were taking along that route. But there have been a number of steps that we have taken. First of all, we could say that childcare is an essential part when it comes to gender equality, the equal opportunity to participate in the labour market. And in Iceland, over 90% of children aged 1 to 5 have access to government-paid quality childcare. And this has been high on the political agenda ever since the late 1970s, early 1980s. Equal right for parents to a parental leave has been the norm in the Icelandic labour market since 2000, and we see an increase in the participation of fathers in the parental leave. And just recently, the joint parental leave was extended from 9 months to 12 months in total. As a result of those two significant steps in the labour market, over 79% of Icelandic women are active in the labour market today. We still have a high participation of women in a part-time work, 35% of women work part-time, But this high labour market participation is one of the driving forces between a high GDP per capita in Iceland. Now, today, women make up 2/3 of university students. So we see that there has been a steady increase in university graduates from women. This is a change from about an equal split some 30 years ago when I myself was graduating from university. One of the changes that we made recently in the labour market as well, because despite increased levels of education with women, we still saw that, for example, board participation of women was very low. So back in 2013, we introduced gender quotas on company boards and public institutions. Started back in 2008 for public institutions and gradually moving on to companies as well from 2013 onwards. Has been quite successful, and a wider support has been for this mechanism and growing support ever since the final introduction in 2013. Women in government has been also high on the agenda, and now about half of the government is half of the ministers in government are women. About 40% of parliamentarians are women, and we're also reaching parity in municipalities. And then finally, in May 2017, we introduced the mandatory certification of equal pay. And that goes to show that changes like this, the driving force between Iceland's position as number one in the world when it comes to gender equality, is the simple fact change is driven. It doesn't just happen. And this all started in Iceland back in 1975, what we referred to as the women's strike or the women's day off, where about 80% of women in Iceland took the day off to protest against the inequality in society in general, but especially in the labour market when it came to men and women. And this marks really the starting point for gender equality in Iceland, we can say. And from there onwards, political empowerment of women was steadily growing. And back in 1980, our dear Vigdís Finnbogadóttir was the first democratically elected woman as a national leader, and was a very successful president in Iceland between 1980 and 1996. Is still going strong, still a role model for young men and women when it comes to gender equality, and is still pushing very hard for gender equality in Iceland and worldwide. We owe her a great deal in this respect, and we can actually see in this picture how her election marked a turning point in gender equality in politics. We saw that up until that time, women had constituted steadily about 5% of parliamentarians up until 1979. But from that point onwards, the percentage has been more or less growing in every election. Unfortunately, not including our last elections, but we have a new one coming up this fall, and hopefully we'll be able to get back on track with that one. So again, almost at parity there, or close to it, with about 40% of parliamentarians being women. But turning to the equal pay standard, and how does it actually work? Now, the discussion of equal pay for work of equal value has been a long one. And most Western countries have actually had some form of legislation prohibiting discrimination based on gender for the past, we could say, 60 years or so. But still our progress has been very slow, to say the least. But the equal pay standard is, in effect, quite a simple standard. It's a typical management standard. It's much like any ISO standard when it comes to quality or environmental standards. It's simply shifting the burden of proof from the employee to the company in responsibility of equal pay for work of equal value. Of course, we can say or argue that companies have always carried or shouldered that responsibility, but the burden of proof has been very difficult for the employee. We know that people do not generally like to sue their employers. It's a difficult, burdensome task to take, and we have very few court cases, or had very few court cases here in Iceland and from what I hear elsewhere as well. Very rare event that people actually sue the company that they are currently working for, at least. So we thought, well, if we really want to make progress in this, the burden of proof can't lie with the employee. The employee is, we could say, with a very limited knowledge of the pay structure within the company. It's very difficult to prove whether they are being discriminated against or not. And it's much more natural for the company to simply have it certified that this is not the case. And it's very much like environmental standards for that case, or quality standards that companies are quite used to work with. They simply have to show and have an independent auditor come in every year or every other year to make sure that they are actually working in line with how they claim they are working. Now, companies are still free to develop their own equal pay systems. It doesn't mean that there's a one size fits all in this respect, which has been a common criticism of the law, which is a clear misunderstanding. The company develops its equal pay system exactly the way it wants it to work, reflecting how it wants to reward its employees, whether it's based on strict performance measures, education, years working with the company, whatever tangible metrics the company can actually introduce into their equal pay systems. But that's the key part. It has to be a tangible metric that they are using, so that it can actually be audited and certified by a third party. Secondly, what we see also is in the equal pay system, there has to be a distinction between the work itself and the employee doing the work. So we actually classify jobs of equal value. We classify the level of pay that we are paying for each we could say value class of work. And then on top of that, we add the individual remuneration for the employee, or how we reward individual employee based on their performance or other metrics that we want to use. In essence, it's not a complex system, but of course this is where the tricky part begins, actually classifying the work itself, making sure that we are classifying equally work, different tasks, but we could say of equal value to the company, and then making sure that we have a transparent, tangible metrics to remunerate the employee for their individual performance. Now, as we were working on the law itself back in 2016, 2017, we quite often got the question, why do we have to make it mandatory? Why is it so necessary? Isn't this an increased regulatory burden for companies? Won't companies simply reach this target by themselves? Isn't it enough? Because in Iceland this standard had been in development since 2008, going through some trial phases back in 2013 to 2016. And the standard really passed its completion stage, we can say, at year-end 2016. And quite a lot of criticism was, is this really a necessary step? And my argument at the time was simply, we aren't making enough progress, not by a mile really. And we can see that actually over the past 10, 15 years, the global gender income gap is actually widening, not narrowing as the goal has been. Despite all the talk on the importance of gender equality, on the importance of respecting these basic human rights, on the importance of actually remunerating men and women equally, we are still nowhere close to closing the gap, and actually the problem seems to be widening, not narrowing. This is both true locally and this is both true globally, but also locally here in Iceland. We see a similar trend. There has been very difficult to really take these final steps to close the gap. And when we look to really again the reasons also and the effects of this discrimination in the labor market, we see, for example, in Iceland, women's lifetime earning, despite the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that we are leading the world in gender equality, women's lifetime earnings here in Iceland are still on average 30% lower than that of men's. And their present total annual wages are between 15 to 20% lower. And we can see that the regular unadjusted full-time pay is on average about 13 to 15% lower still today, even despite the new legislation, even despite all the efforts made to close the gender pay gap here in Iceland. And the strictly measured gender pay gap stands at about 5% in Iceland today. I would like to pause there a little bit because that metric is dangerous in my view. It is much more important to focus on actually the unadjusted full-time pay gap, which is about 15%. And why? Because we are trying to take away all kinds of metrics in the official gender pay gap that actually are a part of the problem. For example, the gender segregated labor market that we have here in Iceland as elsewhere, where we look at, for example, teachers, healthcare professionals, that where we on average reward much less for a similar length of education than we do, for example, when it comes to business degrees or engineering. And we could ask ourselves, I mean, even in societies where we always claim that we are focusing on the level of education, the value of education, how are we actually rewarding educators? Clearly, quite significantly below the university students that they are actually producing or graduating. And the same goes for healthcare professionals. What is more important, especially in these times in COVID, than our healthcare professionals, but also in the longer term with aging societies. We know that we are in ever increasing demand for healthcare professionals, but we are simply not taking the steps to reward them accordingly. So we have to look at the unadjusted pay gap, not just the adjusted one. We see the same trend here as elsewhere. The gap increases with age. So women and men start out fairly equally in the labor market, but with age the gap increases. And this is true for 30-year-olds today, which started the labor market maybe 5 years ago, or 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. The same trend we see for each generation, really. This is not a problem that goes away with time. It is simply repeated over and over again. We see that women work more part-time. We see that more women than men hold university degrees, but still are paid less. And we see that the pay gap in Iceland, as elsewhere, is usually wider in the private sector than in the public sector. And like I mentioned earlier, we have a severely gender segregated labor market, which contributes significantly to the discrimination in the labor market. So when we add this all up, the unequal share of family responsibility, the unequal share of parental leave, where still, even here in Iceland, women on average take about twice as long a parental leave than men do. When we see the unpaid care work, for example, for elderly parents, when we see the level of part-time work unequally divided between men and women, when we see the inequality in the career development, the increasing pay gap with age, all resulting in the gender pay gap, and finally in significantly lower pension benefits at the end of working life for women, it is clearly no longer the private affair of companies. It is simply transferring a social cost to societies where twice as many women are relying on public pension benefits than men. So we argued at the time, this is a matter for legislation. This is a clear case for why we should not wait for the market to take care of it, take care of the problem itself, but where we simply need to step in and change. What we know is that unless we are more decisive, closing the gender pay gap will take decades. It is true, of course, that equal pay certification carries expense, but so do a number of other responsibilities we pass on companies. When it comes to health and safety, accounting, environmental standards, these are areas where we do not hesitate to legislate companies. Why is it that we are so reluctant to do the same when it comes to gender equality? But it should also be borne in mind here that these salary systems or equal pay systems can also be a very effective management tool. They introduce a more disciplined structure in salaries and salary-related expense. And we also see that with the companies that have introduced the standard so far, there is increased confidence and satisfaction on behalf of the employees in salary fairness. They simply trust their companies' employees better once they have been certified than before. So I would say there is a clear case for taking this decisive step to make it mandatory. And I hope that the equal pay standard will become a widespread tool to close the gender pay gap worldwide in the future. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to take some questions now.
Good morning and happy International Women's Day. And we now have the International Women's Day with the theme Choose to Challenge. I want to begin by thanking the European Association for People Management for hosting this event, and Mannauður, the HR Association in Iceland, for taking part and inviting me here today. Just do it. It sounds so easy. Just close the gender pay gap. Well, actually, we in our company and many other companies in Iceland have done it. My name is Víðir Ragnarsson. I'm the head of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives at Reykjavík Energy. And closing the pay gaps has been part of my job description for the last 10 years. I will share with you some of the learning points we have been going through in my company on this way. And let's begin by going to the year 2010. So Reykjavík Energy is run by men. 25% of the women in the management position in the organizational hierarchy are women, and the gender pay gap is around 7%. So it's in the right way. It's better than 2 years before when it was 8.4%, but still 7%. In the year of 2008 to 2010, the company was badly hit by the international financial crisis. And in the year 2011, new management came to the company, and when it was decided to reorganize the company and restructure it financially, it was also decided to build up a more inclusive culture inside the company. It was decided to increase the power of women, to bring more women into management position, and it was decided to close the gender pay gap. In the year 2017, Women in management first was over 50%. It had been increasing from the year 2010, and we have kept it equal since then. In 2017, we also celebrated the closing of the adjusted gender pay gap. So from the 7% at 2010 to 0.3% in 2017. And we have kept it within zero from that time, from 2017. We were at the place in 2017 that, more power had been brought to women and the distribution of pay was more equal. But what did we do? How did we do it? I want to go a little bit back and explain to you some of the forces that are at play here. The gender system, it's the historical system of how we attribute jobs to women and men. Historically, women have been in the back. They have been caring for the home, caring for the family, tending to kids, tending to the sick, while men have been in the front, bringing value to society in a more seen way. So they have tended to not the people, but to the power structures and to the wealth. So having the power, and the women have been in the back. So their contribution to society has been unseen. A man has been in the front, and it has been seen much more clearly. And that is how value is being seen still today, that men do the jobs and do the things that are visible, has more effects, and women are in the back. And it still goes through this old system still today. And it is very, very understandable in that respect that people ask themselves, when you are closing a gender pay gap, why should you do it? Why are you going to pay women more for jobs that are less valuable? Should be more in the back, as if we look at the historical situation. But how did we address this in my company? The company is very varied. We have power plants in Hellisheiði and Nesjavellir, where we harness the power of earth. We have utility systems where we harness and distribute the hot water and warm water and cold water and electricity to the people. We have a fiber optic system which we sell the internet. And the newest one of our companies are where scientists capture the carbon dioxide and turn it into stones and plug it down into the earth. And so this company is very varied in how it in operations and how it functions. So to address and attack the age-old system of job distribution between men and women, we had to design a system. To attack the system, we had a new system. So gender pay gap and women in gender-related jobs are representation of what the society around us values. And this is also in our company. So in order to address this, we needed data on every one of our employees. we had to create a framework that explains the value to us. And it had to make sense for the business. We are not only doing this because it's a human rights issue, but we are also doing it, creating this framework so we understand who are the most valuable employees, who are the ones that brings the value to our business. So we had to map out the skills of every employee and in these different operations. And on the way, we also had to help develop a software to measure and address these discrepancies. So the system we have today to explain value to us was rather simple. We have job categories, and through the years we started by having around 20 to 30 job categories to describe the jobs in our company. Today we have 6 categories. In that respect, and one of the pitfalls we fell into was we categorized the jobs too narrowly, and by that we categorized it by having jobs that were only done by men and only by women. So by default there was no gender pay gap within the jobs. So by having them wider, having them more simple, and having the job categories containing more jobs, in the broader sense, we are inviting ourselves to value the jobs that are mainly attributable to women and men, and to value them in the same way. We have education in our model and responsibility within the company. We have also financial responsibility, the span of control of our employees. And when we look at each employee, we measure performance in the same way for all the 600 people that work with us, and the growth potential we see in every employee. So this is, it's quite clear that this is quite simple, and we would like to have it simple so our employees understand it. These are the things you have to do, and this is how we attribute value and how pay should be attributed. The adjusted gender pay gap, we closed that in 2017. And we measure the pay gap every month. And we have kept it within 1% from 2017. Sometimes in favor of men and sometimes in favor of women. It is something that changes every month. There are changes in pay, people leave the company, people are hired to the company. But we try to have the system foresee the changes. We have very centralized pay decisions, and the HR or benefit function in the company has to make a recommendation for every pay decision, and it is measured against the effects on the gender pay gap. We measure monthly, and we have a system in place, a software from Pay Analytics that gives us a recommendation on what employees to change pay to close the gender pay gap. We look at the employees that we are paying in the most unfair way according to this framework and model we introduced before. And we analyze the impact of every decision that has to do with pay before that decision is taken. There are 2 types of pay gaps. That is one of the biggest learning points for us. This is this adjusted pay gap where we take into consideration the education level, the years of work experience, occupation, industry is often taken into account, location, and so it is a way of measuring pay, comparable pay for as comparable jobs. But the unadjusted pay gap is just the real difference in pay between men and women. And if we look at in historical sense, that has been going from around 40% in Western Europe in the year 1970 to close to 10 to 20% as of today. In the world, it's estimated to be around 20%, and in Europe, it's close to 15%. In Iceland, it has been around 14%. We decided last year to report also the unadjusted gender pay gap, and we have changed our reporting and our emphasis on the gender pay gap to this unadjusted gender pay gap, the pay difference, real pay difference between men and women. Today it is around 7%, was 5.7% in 2019. But this brings the assignment into a totally other direction. So we are not only trying to find what is explaining how we pay, but we are actually changing what we pay for women and men. And to address that, we have been thinking about two things. We have to look at the jobs and the gender division of the job market. If we look at our job categories by gender, it is highly gender divided. Office workers are mainly women. Our specialists have more men, and the unskilled workers are more men. And it's a very sad picture of the tradespeople, where 95% of the labor is men, 5% women, and that hasn't changed for the last 10 years. So we need to bring the real focus on getting more women and girls into technical education. That is a discussion and conversation we have to have with our environment, with society. And we have also have to change how we look at office workers, bringing more men into the offices, into the service centers and so. It has also to do with management and responsibility. We have fixed the top management, and we made that equal. But if we look at our responsibility levels from top to bottom, and we draw a line in the middle, it is especially with lower management levels, we are very male dominated, and in our top specialist levels we have over 80% men. We have in the lower professional levels the same distribution, over 70% men, and this has to change. It is not only necessary to bring more women into top management position, but it has to be through all responsibility levels. When the focus is on changing the bigger picture, we have to look at other assignment, and this has given us ideas and new projects to change the we're looking at hiring process. So we have implemented equality goals for every hire. And on the hiring process, we have to implement equality measures that gives us some idea how we are against that goal we have set. And we have also worked within the culture. We have tried to create a culture that is inclusive. So we have to address the dark side of the genders, and we have a zero tolerance against any kind of aggressive behavior, sexual harassment, and sexual violence. We have in the year 2021 we are going on with our project that is focusing on every job and the lower responsibility jobs especially, and bringing awareness to our people that every job and every link in the value chain of the company is important. So I wouldn't be doing my job well if the people around me wouldn't clean the offices right, and the people in the kitchen wouldn't cook the food. One of our most proud equality assignment and project is equalizing the working hours for all employees. We changed the working hours for our employees in unskilled and tradespeople, where we have 80 to 95% men, and from 10 hours day to 8 hours day. And so our fathers that are working in our workforce are not bound by work when the children need them in the kindergarten and in the schools. So they can pick up their kids, and they cannot stay at home if the children and the family need it. Some of our other diversity and inclusion projects are measuring other demographic pay gaps. We are going now into a project where we are ensuring that our services, the services of the company, is as easily accessible to everyone in the society, no matter if they speak Icelandic or not, no matter how old they are, or no matter if they are disabled or not. And our projects, when we decide to go on a project, we are now on our way to estimate the terms of the project in the effects on equality, both the participants in the projects and also the output of the projects, if that is affecting people differently according to demographic background. So we are on our way to implementing an equality-driven company rather than just equality being an HR project. In 2010, we decided on the culture, that the culture should be more inclusive. And here is a measurement of the job satisfaction by gender from the year 2011, and it shows it has been rising, and it has been rising faster for the men in Reykjavik Energy than the women. It is higher for the women, but it has been rising faster and is much higher than the market benchmark in Iceland for the men in Reykjavik Energy. We have created a culture where both sexes, both genders feel good, well-being is good, and decision-making is more diverse. There are more people that come to the decision on, and every decision is run against a broader background of people. We believe that we have better decision when that happens. in 2015, McKinsey made an estimate of if we would advance equality, would add $12 trillion to the global growth economy. That is equivalent to the GDP of China and USA combined. So equality work is about creating wealth. It's not only the right thing to do, but also the wise thing to do. Equality helps brings material wealth and more richness of life and well-being to all. So what did we learn? We learned that, well, by just at least doing something, we can learn, and we can learn new things. And we can do things that we thought was, well, hard and difficult and hard to do. We also learned that the best way to address age-old historical systems, we need new systems, both within companies and also with the help of a system that were placed into law in Iceland. We learned now going forward that, well, closing one pay gap is a way towards bigger societal changes. There are more gaps to bridge, and of course, businesses are a big part of the change.
I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Ásdís, Þorsteinn and Vidya for their really interesting presentations this morning. Obviously, due to coronavirus, we can only have a certain number of people in the studio in Iceland, and you can see they are suitably sat distanced apart. That's not to say that anyone can't be asked questions this morning. So if you do have questions for anyone who spoke today, please put them in the Q&A and I will pick up as many as I can in the time I have available. But first, I would wish all of the colleagues who have joined us today, and indeed our wonderful panel, a happy International Women's Day. And if you'll indulge me, I'll start with my own question first, and then I'll move on to those of my colleagues. And this is to all three panel members or whoever would like to answer. And this is one very close to my heart, particularly due to the COVID situation in the UK at the moment. Do you think the COVID-19 pandemic could endanger the progress made on gender equality so far? And perhaps Ásdís, if you start on this one.
Yes, thank you, Becca. It's a great question. And yes, definitely. I think we are very much in danger of taking several leaps backwards in what we have accomplished. And we can see both here in Iceland and in studies being done in Europe that it's already happening. There's much more of the emotional labor due to the COVID crisis, homeschooling and whatnot, that falls on women. And that definitely is a challenge. If it's only women pulling their weight at home, that will definitely, affect what we've accomplished so far, I'm sure. And that's a problem we need to address.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I mean, this is a real risk we need to be monitoring, and I mean, also when it comes to factors like domestic violence, I mean, we're seeing reports from all over that it is increasing under the lockdown conditions, and that is something authorities have to take seriously and have to be much more proactive in tackling.
Thank you. So, Thorsteinn, a question for you. Is there a bonus system rewarding compliant companies, sort of a bonus malus system punishing those non-compliant ones?
No, there is a penalty to be implemented once the law has taken full effect, but no, there is no reward. And I've been asked this question a few times, and while I was still in Parliament, I wondered myself whether we should have a tax break for companies showing some measure of results when it comes to pay equity. And I think that would actually be a better approach. I mean, it would be better for companies to get the tax benefit. I mean, to be honest, they would probably pursue it much more stringently if that was the reward instead of a possible penalty at the end of the tunnel. But I think, I mean, like has been mentioned in both lectures here this morning, I mean, the benefit for companies is much greater than just the, would say, the prestige of being an equal pay company. I mean, we see it in job satisfaction. We see it in performance with more gender balanced companies, that simply companies stand to gain right down to the bottom line in an equal pay and a more gender balanced environment than those that are not. And I think that is really the awakening we need to get across, the message we need to get across to companies. This isn't just a question of what are we forcing you to do, but rather what do you stand to gain? And the gain is much greater than the effort needed to reach the goal.
And that's a really good place to start. What do you gain rather than what's it going to cost us?
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to ask, I understand that the EU has recently launched some possible directives on equal pay. Are either of you aware of these? And if so, what are your views on those proposals?
I haven't taken a close look at those specific proposals, but we do see, and when I was more active in the field, I saw a number of sort of initiatives taken by different governments towards this direction, which I think generally is positive. I mean, for politics and the statement "just do it" or "just do something," which is really also just a thought to take to heart. This doesn't happen by itself, and we can talk about gender equality and equal pay all we want, but we have to drive it. It has to be a change that we actually drive through companies, through government initiatives. And we can't just simply wait for the problem to correct itself. Mm-hmm. And it's really important. I think that will be our experience with, I mean, of course, it's too early to tell of the real effect of the equal pay standard in Iceland, but I believe it will have a decisive effect. It may not close the gap entirely, and I think we have to keep moving toward new initiatives to close the unadjusted gap as well, which I stress always is something we need to keep our focus on. Mm-hmm. But we have to remember this, and I mean, the equality struggle throughout the decades wasn't just something that happened; it was driven, and we have to keep that in mind always.
Yeah, I think the most scary thing that could happen is that we have this standard put in place, and everyone is like, "Great, we're here."
Exactly.
Let's rest. That can't happen.
And that leads on actually to some of the other thoughts as well. There was a question around positive discrimination, meaning that being a man when applying for a promotion, they could be potentially discriminated against simply on the form of D&I. And I just wondered what the panel's view was on that.
That's a very good question. I've sometimes wondered myself, and we see, for example, that young men here in Iceland are actually more negative towards gender equality in many studies than older men are. And you have to wonder, are they worried that they will have to, you could say, pay their father's debt, if we could put it in that manner? But I mean, yes, some level of positive discrimination will have to take place if we are to balance, for example, management positions. It's inevitable. Of course, you could say qualifications come first, ability comes first, always. But when those are equal, we should look to gender in terms of when we are balancing. And of course, it can go in both directions. We have female-dominated professions that we want more men in. And but in the male-dominated professions, we have to take decisive steps if we want to really balance it.
I also feel that if your gender has been a privilege, if it has been easier for you to get the lucrative CEO position because you're a man, and then all of a sudden you don't have that privilege of your gender, and you have to kind of rely on what you bring to the table as an individual, isn't that just fair? Because it's not that. I mean, during the past, there's a lot of CEOs that have gotten their positions because they are a man, and now they have to rely on something else, and I think that's good for society as a whole.
I think I might have to agree with you on that one, Hassan. Another interesting question. The legislation in Iceland is part of a total social demographic approach and overall solutions, yet that's not the case in other countries. What would you suggest?
Oh God, there's no there's no quick fix. You have to take all the steps. I mean, it comes to sharing the burden, parental leave, the sort of, you could say, home responsibility, taking care of children, taking care of the elderly. We have to split the burden there, and we have to design measures to encourage that. And we saw that work in Iceland. Men have become much more active in raising their children, taking time off work with young children, etc. We still have a long way to go, but we are taking further steps to try to push for a more balanced parental leave, for example. And you have to take these steps throughout the entire chain. And I mean, I always say, when you look at the sort of end of work life imbalance, there you really get a clear picture of the problem, where, I mean, twice as many women in Iceland, even with us being leading in gender equality, still twice as many women are solely reliant on public pensions, not their own savings, when it comes to the end of life. It shows the sort of level of discrimination throughout their entire working life. And this is, why we have to look at the whole chain from childhood onwards.
Thank you. And just building on that, there was a question around what were the obstacles in implementing the equal pay legislation, and kind of what role did the trade unions or managements play in this?
Well, that is an interesting one, and was a little bit disappointing at the time. I mean, I would say the legislation caught a great sort of political momentum in Parliament, and we actually got the law passed quite quickly. And that is, I think it displays the level of equality in Iceland, because opposing, you could say, sensible steps to take in gender equality is a little bit like throwing yourself in front of a train. So the train will move, you will get in the way. But we still saw, especially on the employer side, opposition, and they actually took a formal opposition to the move, saying it was too early, too costly, too burdensome for companies, etc. And of course, I mean, it's a bit a traditional move that employers associations take to any, let's say, governmental measures. But still, I mean, we all agree that the taxing regulation has to be in place, the environmental regulation has to be in place, health and safety. I mean, this is not something we just leave to companies. But why is it always that when we discuss something on the gender equality side, that companies rise up and say, "Oh no, we can't have that"? And I would want employers associations, and I hope still that there will be a change here in Iceland in this effect, that we actually take this to heart, also on the employment association side, saying we really want to be ambitious when it comes to gender equality, and we welcome such initiatives. Of course, we want them to be sensible, not overly burdensome, but the equal pay standard isn't. And the fact is, when we look at the experience from implementing it, we see actually companies that have gone through the implementation process are more positive on average than they were before entering this process. And they're actually seeing also direct benefits from it. Yeah. It's a more could say, of course, a bit more disciplined process in salary making, but that is a part of the problem as well. I mean, just sort of off-the-hand decisions by managers, mostly rewarded to men, because men ask for salary increases more often than women on average. Just the sort of the basic fact in this. So I would say the first steps are positive, and I hope we will see a gaining momentum behind this.
I think this is a really important point, that of course now in the beginning days we're all finding our ways around this, but to really be able to draw forward the value that companies gain from using this standard, I think when we kind of together realize that, I think we will gain more momentum as well, because it's not just, you're not just doing it just to have the stamp. When you really realize the value that it brings to the company, that you're kind of going through all the steps, realizing, okay, what is it that brings value to us and what is it we're rewarding for, then that can really be a valuable attribute to the business.
Thank you. It was an interesting point you made about women not asking for pay rises generally as much as men do. Maybe that's something we need to change in terms of our next generations, my children, their children, moving forward. Ásdís, as president of the Icelandic Association, you seem to be in a good position to do that. How might you change that? How might you drive that forward?
I think it's important not just to focus on training women to ask for more, or training women to be more proactive, or just to put all the responsibility on women. I think that would be it would be a too narrow approach, because this is a, how do you say it in English, like a systematic way of thinking in the whole society. So we need to start wide and start loud, and I think the standard maybe helps us to change our way of thinking a bit, but I think it would be a detrimental to just solely focus on girls and kind of teach them how to be more like men. That's definitely not the approach.
Be wide and be loud. I really like that. I also have some questions that have come up for Vidya.
Yes.
So I wonder if it would be possible to swap.
We will swap.
In a time of COVID, all works. Wonderful. Are you with us now?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. So there were some really specific questions on your presentation that I'd like to raise so that people have the chance to hear from you. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So there was a question around, why does the pay change on a monthly basis? Can you just recover that, please?
Yeah, pay is kind of a barometer of what is happening in the company, and pay changes because people leave, people are hired, and people ask for raises. So it's changing in a company that is like us, close to 500 to 600 people, and it is changing constantly, and so to be ahead of the change, and therefore we decided to have it a really centralized a proposal for pay. So we are in control of the gender pay gap. So because of this social system that has been with us for ages, there is a tendency towards going back to in the old way of doing things, and that does not benefit equality.
And then another very quite specific question: if there are only 6 job categories, then the salary range might be quite big. How do you find a way that the salaries don't just move up?
Well, we add another layer in the responsibility categories. So there are more responsibility categories, and so in effect the gap is more narrow when you add that into the picture.
Okay, thank you. And then sort of leading on from that, a really, really interesting question. How did you make it not just another HR initiative? How did it become all-encompassing?
Well, that is basically a management decision.
It's a great question, by the way.
Yeah. Because well, there is a marketing in being a equality-driven company. It is also we have seen brings real value to the organization and to our employees and to the work. And so it is a management decision, as it was in 2011, as I explained in my lecture, to address equality. And now we are extending it to other areas like service and like how we plan our projects. So we are in the equality business also, and that is a good business. It adds value.
I like that. We're in the equality business. That's good. And so I was leading on from that. How do you support women with young children who want to work but want to be equal within your organization?
Well, there's the same support for everyone, both women and men, and it has to be like that. And we have to encourage our managers to well, not solve the problems or difficulties at home only with a solution that it is in the hand of the women. It is required of our managers that they view it positively, that man has also other roles and has to be at place at home when needed.
And here it's really important that this is just not just nice words on papers, but this is really from the top down expected of managers to enforce that, and not just paint a nice picture and then not walk the talk.
Exactly.
And two more questions along those lines. In terms of the cultural aspects, did you work with the learning teams and the OD teams to change people's perceptions? And a specific question on what were the exact equality measures on the hiring process?
Well, we are working very closely with the learning team, and we have well, mandatory and not mandatory learning on equality, and we are very loud in our well, inner web in how we address equality. So that is part of it. In terms of well, the other question was around. Could you repeat
Sorry,
it?
around the hiring, the equality in the hiring process.
Yeah, the hiring process.
You talked about the hiring process.
Yeah. We are implementing it now because we have not been successful. We can just say it as it is in changing the proportions of women and men in specific jobs. So we are going to set a goal for each hire. That is, now we are looking for men or women. And so in the next step and all steps of the hiring process, there has to be well, a quota of those who go through. And so that is one of the ideas we are working towards.
This is really important for the HR profession as a whole, to always have measurements to be able to report what you are achieving. It's so easy to use fancy words and have high aspirations, but you really have to measure it. You have to set yourself some goals that you can attain.
Yeah, and you have to explain if you do not fulfill the goals. So you have to be
why, what happens.
Yeah,
be accountable for what you're saying.
Exactly.
We have time for possibly 2 more questions. And I really like this question, having small children myself. What's your best advice to mothers and fathers career guiding their children, or to sons and daughters who have maybe left the nest and then are moving forward with their own children and establishing their own families? Astis?
Our best advice,
Uh-huh.
just be really careful in choosing your partner.
I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, before you have children, make sure that you are selecting a partner that is thinks about things the same way as you do. It's hard to. It has to be equal, and it has to be. You have to be able to have that honest conversation with your partner, because you might think you're doing more than you're doing in your home, but to be really able to break it down and have that discussion to make sure that this is truly a partnership and not just because the tendency is that this emotional labor, as it's called, it falls on women in such a great part, but men need to be accountable and step up there. So my suggestion for people that haven't had kids yet is be careful whom you have your kids with. It really matters. It really does.
And then a final question, and I'm afraid I'm going to ask you to swap seats again. The coronavirus means that I would like to hear from Thorstein one final time, if that's okay. Apologies. Hopefully soon we won't have to go through this. And the final question for today: Iceland has always been in front. Other countries are looking to you. They're looking to see how they can keep up with you. What I would like to hear from today, from both of you, is what are you thinking about next? Because whatever you're thinking about next, if we hear it from you today, just maybe our own countries can leapfrog you and get there first.
That's a very good question. We were actually just discussing that before the meeting here, and there is a very interesting initiative. It's starting. Well, I think both politics and the trade unions and the labor market in general are agreeing on we have to do something, and that is referring to the unadjusted pay gap and the gender segregated labor market. And to the basic question, how do we value different work? How do we value our healthcare professionals or educators or these sort of female-dominated professions? And I think that is really the next big step that we could take to really sort of re-evaluate these different jobs that we have so important in societies, and really take a thorough look at, I mean, why is it that a person with a 5-year university degree is so much is worth so much more when it comes to the private sector, engineering, a business degree or something like that, than in the public sector when it comes to healthcare professionals that are so vital, or educators, for example. And the gap there is striking, and we have to do something about it. And it takes a societal approach. I mean, we really have to reevaluate these things.
Yeah, so it will not be an easy task, but no, we're still just going to do it.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Thorstein, Vidar, off camera, and Astis, thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning and for answering all of the questions that have arisen. I'd like to hand back over to Evan now for some closing comments.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, I would like to use this day to congratulate all you women. It's the International Women's Day. It's a day for celebration, but it's not a day for rest, not for women and not for men. And I would also like to add that the International Women's Day is important by itself, but the efforts we put in and the results we achieve also represent a stepping stone for other fights on equal opportunity and anti-discrimination. gender, color, nationality, sexual orientation, age, religious belief. Discrimination is bad. It's bad for those who are directly affected. It's bad for business and it's bad for society. He said, it's not only the right thing to do, it's the wise thing to do. And I think that is so important. And equal opportunity is impossible if not families, companies, and as shown by Icelandic government, also society and legislation play together. Equal opportunity does not create equality by itself. We have to do the work on all arenas at the same time, all of us, and use push and pull. Legislation, family decisions, individual choices, and company policies must be aligned. And as you have highlighted, equal gender opportunity is not only a fight for women to take, excellently demonstrated by 2 men in the panel. Without male support, this is really an uphill battle. Mm-hmm. I would also like to say that much starts with equal obligation, rights, and opportunity at home. Choose your partner, you said. Fathers must also take responsibility. But, and very important, at the same time, women must get the support from men. At the same time as they do that, mothers must let loose and give them space, rights, and opportunity. And now, after insights, inspiration, and celebration, go back and do something about it. From challenge to change, change is driven. It does not only happen. Thank you all. This has been a wonderful session. Speakers and expertise from Iceland, produced from Norway and Iceland, Q&A from United Kingdom, and distributed to all over Europe. A special thank to Thorstein Vidar, Astis Beck, technical producer Sven, and Eilendur and Sigrun at the Icelandic team. To all national associations and all of you professionals who have done a tremendous job, especially on the days of pandemic. Thank you all for joining us today. Just do it.